Good afternoon. It's been for me a great conference. You guys up against a fantastic challenge with so many species affected and this nefarious rust that you have. So I'm just going to share maybe a few reflections and everything like that too. But I've really enjoyed the conference, the diversity of topics. One thing I was reflecting on this morning is some of you had mentioned some resistance and some trees out there. Well, in a sense, that sets you up for a potential second wave. And so all those trees you've identified as resistance, in my mind, are now sentinel trees. And because the question is, right now, the rust, what generally happens with many pathogens, and such as the rust and blister rust, it goes through and knocks out the low-hanging fruit, which in our case with blister rust is like 99% of the population out there. There's no incentive in the rust at that early stage to develop virulence against resistance because there's so little resistance out there and stuff like that too. So once it knocks out the susceptible trees, the interesting question will be, are your resistant trees, with whatever type of resistance they have, will they continue to be, is it a durable resistance and stuff like that too? So, keep your eye out and look for those changes. And it may happen on some species and not in some other species and whatever too, but it's another thing to add to your agenda and reflection. As I work in white bark pine and they identify trees out in the forest, and we test them, deem some of them susceptible, some of them resistant, and the susceptible ones haven't died yet. Some of the susceptible ones haven't died. So the resistance one, to me, they're all sentinels. Is there an uptake and an increase in the rust propagating in those areas? So now it's going to knock out the susceptible trees and then maybe next hit the resistant trees. We do some work for Alberta, Canada. They have areas where 95, 98, 99% of their limber pine are infected. They send us seed mostly off of trees that are not infected, so the small majority, you would say, well, great, a lot of pre-selection, a lot of those trees are going to be resistant. Well, when they send it down to us, a lot of those still test out as being very susceptible. We test 60 seedlings, and most of them are lucky if they have 5% of their progeny left. But a few of those parent trees do have resistance, and it turns out, in most cases, to be major gene resistance. And so I was looking at checking the background. They sent me the background on all the trees they selected from. And so I had these major gene resistant trees. I looked at the background, and I noticed from the notes, a couple of the trees did have cankers on them. And I said, well, that's interesting because these are major gene resistant families. They shouldn't have cankers on them unless a new virulent strain of rust has arisen there. And so I think we now, working with a molecular pathologist and whatever, I think we now have documentation. We think that the good news is they have resistance up there. The bad news is it's mostly major gene resistance. And the other bad news is we think already in some localities a virulent strain of the rust has arisen against that major gene. So again, your trees out there that are resistant, hopefully they will hold up forever. That'd be really nice. But it is something to watch. So I'm just a few reflections to share here. I don't know whether they're really strategic goals, options for resistance, et cetera. You guys have done a pretty good job at this stage of characterizing the problem for all communities. That's an ongoing thing, and a lot of great information out there to provide. I'm curious, under the current conditions or worst case scenario, what the ultimate goal is. I'm always looking for, monitoring is fantastic. You need monitoring, but I always want to know what's the game plan in terms of the action items. I read a paper on tan oak and sedge oak death a number of years ago, and it seemed to me that they were just waiting to document the last tan oak tree to die. And I wanted to know, well, can't we do anything, whether it's resistance, whether it's biocontrol, whatever, too. So I think making sure, along with the monitoring, that the action items get at least as much a plug out there as what you think can be done. And I'm a little uncertain. I'm still new here, don't know your total setup, a lot of sponsors and whatever, too, is how centralized this is. You've got such an enormous task here that hopefully there's all sorts of people involved, but hopefully there's some group or committee truly leading it, so there isn't too much duplication, because there's really not, there has to be some duplication, but there's not enough money to have a lot of duplication, reinvent the wheel, and that type of thing. What tangible actions can be taken? We heard some possibilities, in the last couple of days of some research with biocontrol, some research with double-stranded RNA, resistance, et cetera. And so really have to, formulate that strong in my mind. My background is kind of tree breeding and resistance, and I think it works, and I think it will work if properly orchestrated and put together. I think both your countries have had a history of tree breeding and institutes that have that background, those facilities, that type of expertise. Unfortunately, some of those key people, as they retired, there's a lot of people being trained in genomics, but not so much in tree breeding and getting the product out the door. There's a recent issue of Forest called Genomics, Separating Hype from Reality, and I would encourage people to read some of the papers in there. Some of them are written by people with genomics background, and they're saying there's a gulf between the researcher and the application, and the people don't really talk, and you're really not going to get much out of it. So, the more cooperation we can have at the beginning when the basic researchers start their work, the better. How can others help? This is an immense problem. You already have a lot of partners. You have some citizen scientists. The more the better that you can enlist. I heard about a recent group in the United States. I haven't used them yet, but I talked to them, called Adventured Scientists. And I don't know you have that type of thing here, but they can mobilize up to like 300 people to go out and do surveys. They train them up very professionally, and they get them to do all sorts of sampling and various other things like that too. So there's some creative ideas and creative people out there that can increase your workforce with concerned citizens and everything. And then as you this is a huge effort, as we talked about a little bit yesterday or whatever. I talked and the question came up. Our group has gotten funding for 60 years now, and it doesn't come automatically, and there's some parallel groups that hasn't happened to, but, it's publicizing the success stories and making the linkages and whatever too, and I would say until 10 or 15 years ago, I was content to work in my office, get my job done, move it on, and I didn't worry so much about publicizing the success stories. Now I say things like, to people in the United States, well, I think we have 3 of the top 5 resistance programs in the world to a non-native pathogen. And, I don't particularly like to say that, but you have to, if that has an element of truth to it, or if it's true, you have to knock people on the head gently sometimes with, some facts or whatever too, to catch their attention and saying, okay, these aren't just people going through the motion, they're actually delivering and going out the door. We had 11 people from Sweden come over on a fact-finding thing in September. They spent 2 days with us. I really appreciate this group because they have a problem now in Sweden on their Sylvester pine. It's a rust. They want to set up a resistance program. They were focused. They came over. I thought they were going to come over. They visited North Carolina. I recommended they do that because of another screening program. They come over. They spent 2 days with us. I figured then the weekend they're going to be there, go to see the redwoods. No, they came. They spent 2 days with us, and they flew right back to Sweden. So they were very focused, and that's the type of effort it's going to take to succeed on that. You're going to have to both yourself, and then you're going to have to convey to the public and the funders what is the goal, what can be done, and the diagram that I showed the other day, there really are groups that get together. You're only going to have success if you pull those together. I think that's what's allowed us to succeed for the 50 or so year period of time that we have been there. As I mentioned the other day, the technicians that work with me, I keep taking on new projects. I keep looking at things that need help and taking on new projects. And I don't necessarily plan on doing any of the work. I know I have a team behind me, and they're all really good people, and I got to be careful not to overtax them too much. But they're people that I can trust to help me out and take things on with ASH, with Madrone, with whatever other projects I sense need to be doing. So in that sense, I provide a lead. But certainly, the old adage, there's no I in team, and the more we can pull together, the better. We talked about the phase one, and that's kind of where you guys are right now on resistance as you're investigating a lot of stuff. That's where research has a real important role and can play a real important role. As you move into phase two, research needs to get out of the way and let the tree breeders and associated people do what they do and get the product out the door. And then if they need additional research, and they will in some capacity, then they can go back for the research help. But, research needs to know when to be involved, but also when to be gracious enough to step aside and let others do what they do. Myrtle rust, what will it take? We talked about that yesterday. There's an array of things, no matter what program, all of our programs, it takes all of this type of stuff. I'm very conscious of it. I'm always looking to see how I can get the word out and everything. Starting a new program, what parent trees to select. If you can get biomarkers or something to narrow down. With white bark pine, we have people going out and in some areas selecting trees almost at random. We test them, with only a small percentage of them turn out to be resistant from some areas. Can we find a tool that makes that more efficient so that 90% of the trees they bring in for testing will turn out to be resistant rather than 5, 10, 15% of the trees. So, tools like biomarkers properly validated, and eventually the resistance screening will validate those, will be really good. What level and frequency of resistance is needed? Again, I would say don't think like a crop breeder with a cultivar where you need 100% of your plants or whatever to be resistant. That's not going to happen in most of your forest trees. So be thinking, okay, hey, if 30% of your plants either existing out there or with your breeding were resistant, is that okay? And over time, that will increase as natural selection takes hold and those pollinate each other and various other things. And then how do you actually get them out there? If you had resistance right now, I hear this for the eastern United States. There are some critics or cynics and say, well, hey, even if we had it for chestnut, whatever, there aren't places to plant it because there's other tree species already on those sites. But, I think there are motivated individuals, landowners, and others that will get it out there at least in little nucleation type plantings of islands that will eventually, if the species is meant to exist, it will propagate from there. So be thinking in game too. Even if you go the resistance route, how do you get it out there? The other caution I will give you is let's not screw things up again. So even if you get resistance, you're growing seedlings in the nursery. We hear time after time in the United States of, we're going to put things out there, but the problem is they get a phytophthora or something else in the nursery. So when you're planning out restoration to solve one problem, and maybe you're creating another problem. So be thinking biosecurity of your nurseries or how you put your plants out so that you're not putting out material that's infected with something else as well too. And that's one thing that we have to think much more so, and we should be ahead of the game, be thinking of this and not let critics be thinking of it. We should be forward-thinking on this. So let's not create another problem when we put plants out in the field. That's happened many times in many places in the world. There's a couple supporting papers that I've supplied Bob, maybe a couple others. About 5-6 years ago, a group of 13 or 14 of us in the United States got together, Placerville, California. We had 5 or 6 people from our Washington office, and the charter was when do you launch into a resistance program? And so we wrote a 2 or 3 or 4 page kind of white paper and stuff like that too. And I've supplied that to Bob. And some of you that are plugged into resistance or have the dollars that might support resistance might be able to read down that and say, hey, check these off, or what steps do we need to go through? I'm not going to go through them all here. And then a month from now, I'm going to have, I'm organizing an applied resistance meeting. It's by invitation only, and pretty much everybody invited attended, and we're going to have almost all the resistance programs in the United States, including 3 from Hawaii present. We're going to have people from the Washington, D.C. office that have the ear of Congress that possibly could get additional funds if people convince the people at this meeting or this workshop can convince them that they're on the right track and whatever too. One of the problems with most of these other programs is my facility. I showed a photo the other day, kind of an aerial photo, and it's a pretty large facility. It's on like 150 acres, and we have a lot of trials. We have like 15 greenhouses. We have a staff of maybe 25 or 30, and that's going to to bump up this week a little bit as this massive hiring thing goes on across the United States and whatever like that too. But almost all those other programs don't have that type of facility and everything too. A number of years ago in 2011, I organized an international resistance workshop, and a few people from back east were there. And we one of the field trips was to our facility, and when they got done, they said, "We need a Dorino for the East." And whatever too. So, one of the big things, if you're going to go into resistance and if you're going to go into it on a big scale, do you have the facilities? And I know in New Zealand, I'm sure in Australia, there are tree breeding programs for various other things, like radiata pine and stuff like that too. So you may have the infrastructure, the facilities, certainly the botanic gardens, in a certain extent can help as well too. So I think resistance is at least part of the solution. I think there are ways to fast track the development of resistance. I think there are ways to monitor with these sentinel trees that you already have. Every one of the trees that you think are resistant, including somebody pointed one out, I think Perry down here, never seen rust on that tree. Well, that's wonderful. What about a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 from years? And then somebody's got to investigate, well, why is rust suddenly there? Is it a breakdown in resistance or whatever too? So, let's see. This is part of that instrument to assess and evaluate tree breeding. There's several other pages to it, and like I said, I'm not going to go into it. And then, like I said, the workshop next month is going to be to share experience on what new programs are being started, what has worked, share progress and success, what barriers are there, what funding resources are there, how to fast track programs. As I become an ancient one, I want to get more done even faster. And you learn from experiences and say, hey, if I could do something over again, how would I do it? Or if people got out of my way, how would I do it? And so, you got to have that dream is what's the perfect plan? And then, sell it to people. And the last one is sometimes they go elevator speech. If you put a good message out there, and you got to put a message out there of what you would do, there's foundations and various other things, certainly governments, and we're suddenly, for a short period of time, in a thing where people realize that due to fires, climate change, a need for reforestation, that they don't have the expertise at nurseries, they don't have enough nurseries, they don't have the genetics, they don't know what seed source they're going to use. So this week, from the 20th to 26th, there's a massive hiring thing going on. And so if you had asked me a year ago if that was possible, I would say no way. So you never know when somebody's going to wake up at the high levels and say, we have a problem, and being willing to put forth things to that. I'm seeing more and more literature on the impact of trees or lack thereof on human health. I haven't heard too much about that at this particular meeting, but that's a thing to play up. And whether it's in the cities, whether it's whatever else too, because, human health and the cost of healthcare and everything are big factors. So again, if somebody came down and had, what would you do with $200,000? What would you do with $2 million? What would you do with $20 million plus that is solution oriented? And I'd be curious, I'll have my list of mine of what I could do for my projects in the U.S. and stuff like that too. And I think you have to be ready there and actually have to put it out there before people ask you, so that, hey, somebody or some corporation or somebody may step up at some point and give you a lift if you can convince them you actually have a product that will help solve a problem. So I think that is it. Thank you.